there was an incident where a guy did say very inappropriate things, and it took me 6 months to finally file a complaint. I'm working so hard, I'm doing so great, but now because of what he did to me, if I say something, I'm going to seem weak. And I'm going to seem like I'm whining. But it got to a point where I was just fed up. And then I realized when I brought it up with my manager, it was okay. It wasn't that big of a deal, and I should have probably said something sooner. And it turned out like, they just gave him a warning, and then he did it again to another woman. Then I realized it's really important to speak up right away and shut it down. It's not okay.
Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to my next guest. Her name is Nancy Hoque, and Nancy is a multipotentialite. We'll talk about that a little bit in the podcast, but Nancy founded her own modest fashion line, 16R Scarves. She is currently finishing up her MBA at the Haas Business School at UC Berkeley. She also is an engineer. She studied in electrical engineering, and she is the vice president of the Haas Tech Club, and she also runs a Lean In Circle. She is also involved in the Women in Leadership Club at Haas. As you can see, Nancy has many accomplishments, and I'm so excited to have her on the podcast today. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Alia.
Tell us about who you are and your background.
I'm a Southern California girl. I grew up in San Diego. I love the beach. I went to San Diego for school, UCSD. I also went to San Diego State for my master's. That's where I met my husband. We got married and moved to the East Coast. And so in the last few years, I've had the opportunity to live in a lot of different places, and I feel like those experiences really shaped a lot of who I am today. I moved to DC from San Diego. That's where I began working at Motorola as an engineer. The division I was in was the U.S. federal government's division. So we sold RF communications to the U.S. military. In that environment, it was a very high-powered male environment, and I was in my early 20s then, and it was a very interesting experience. During that time also, they transferred me to Asia, where my husband and I moved to Singapore, and that was a really neat experience where I got to experience Southeast Asian culture, and get connected with family in Bangladesh. My parents are from Bangladesh. But also during all of this time, I started a scarf company called 16R, where I designed scarves as a tool of empowerment. I started wearing a hijab when I was in college at UCSD. It was a bit of a response to what happened in September 11th and all of the negative media that Muslims were receiving. And, growing up in California, in the US, I've always thought of myself as American, and I grew up in a Muslim household. So for all of a sudden being in this negative light, I felt it was really important for me to start wearing a scarf and showing that, I could be like everybody else and I was normal. And I decided to pursue engineering because I was good at math, and it just kind of was natural for me. In addition to that, I'm a mom. I have two amazing boys, Akira and Raiden. My older one is 8 years old and my younger one's 6 years old. And they're kind of my secret behind the scenes motivation for everything that I do.
Let's backtrack a little bit
Okay.
to the moment when you decided that you wanted to be an engineer. I'm very curious about that because there's a lot of focus right now on how we can get more girls into STEM. I find that most women who do find themselves in tech or engineering, it's usually by accident. So tell us about that moment when you decided that you wanted to be an engineer.
One thing that I like about engineering is that it's more than just circuit boards and numbers. It's also about figuring out a solution to a problem and being very logical in how you approach that. So my first year in engineering was really hard. I decided to stay with it because I like a good challenge and I like to prove that I can do something. I didn't want to be the woman who couldn't do engineering. I didn't want it to be something that only boys can do. I remember I took my first engineering class in high school and I was the only girl in my class. And also when I was working at Motorola, we had maybe 50 men engineers and only 4 women in the whole division.
So how did you develop that confidence? I mean, how did you develop that thick skin? Because you're not only a woman, but you're also an Asian woman, and you also wear the hijab, which is like 3 whammies.
Right.
And that must have been tough. What was that
Right.
like for you?
I try not to think of myself as maybe the unfortunate because I don't think there's any value in that. A lot of it is I put so much effort and work to be here. I knew that I earned my spot there. And also, I'm not about to let anyone take it away from me just because they're not used to seeing someone like me.
How do you hold your own? I mean, I'm sure you feel like you're outnumbered. Was there ever a situation where you felt like being a woman and then also being a Muslim woman who wore the headscarf prevented you from opportunities or prevented you from progressing in your career?
Yes, I certainly do think it did in some way. A lot of it because I would be shy, and it took me a while to get to be this confident, and I still think I need a lot of work. I would be very self-conscious sometimes about how people perceive me, but as people got to know me and as I got to know them, those initial perceptions didn't really matter. And I learned to really do great work. So people didn't really focus on whatever my perceived identity was. It was all about the work and the quality of the work. And I learned to connect with people because if you can get someone who may think you're so different from them, but if you can start talking the same language at some point, then it doesn't really matter anymore, right? And then you've become friends. And so I think being able to connect with people who are really different from you is a really great strength to have. So if you're like a girl in a male dominated area, learn to connect with guys so that it's not a big deal anymore and then you can become friends.
Has it ever been challenging for you to develop those relationships, especially now in light of all of the news that it's coming out about, sexual harassment and a lot of the backlash with Uber, and there's a lot of, horrible things happening within the tech world, right? Things
Right.
that were probably underneath the rug and they're slowly being unveiled. Did you ever face any of that type of harassment?
Oh, yeah. Almost every job I've had. When I was at Motorola, there was an incident where a guy did say very inappropriate things, and it took me 6 months to finally file a complaint. I'm working so hard, I'm doing so great, but now because of what he did to me, if I say something, I'm going to seem weak. And I'm going to seem like I'm whining. But it got to a point where I was just fed up. And then I realized when I brought it up with my manager, it was okay. It wasn't that big of a deal, and I should have probably said something sooner. And it turned out they just gave him a warning, and then he did it again to another woman. Then I realized it's really important to speak up right away and shut it down. It's not okay. You're not doing anyone a favor by being quiet.
So talk to me about your modest fashion startup, which was 16R Scarves.
The idea of sixteenR came to me when I first started wearing a scarf, and a lot of my friends, they wore it also, but we also we like fashion, we have our own styles, so we had to be really creative with how we wore it. And when we'd go to the store, there was nothing that was catered towards us. Also, the scarf is such a in-your-face type of thing that I thought making scarves that with a statement would be really neat. So I saw a business opportunity and I decided to launch it. So during my whole sixteenR thing, I realized that by stating that it was a tool of empowerment, it kind of ignited a conversation or a dialogue. Often when people asked about the company or about the hijab or why people wear it, it was tied to the Muslim woman identity. And one thing I learned is the hijab itself, when some women decide to wear a scarf and some women don't decide to wear a headscarf, and that's totally fine. It didn't really matter where my customers were from, whether they're from Indonesia or France or Canada or the US. Everyone kind of had this common interest or common understanding. We have an identity. We like to dress a certain way, and we all don't dress the same way. We have our own styles. We want the fashion industry to acknowledge that we exist. Now that Uniqlo and Gap and these big brands are finally acknowledging this enormous customer base, I think that's huge. We exist. Now you have to cater to us, business talks, right? So that's really cool. And I think all of these entrepreneurs and designers should keep doing it. Bloggers should keep posting their styles. It's as if this generation has taken ways of dressing from the past with styles of now and created something new and has inspired this massive industry to acknowledge us. And I think that's a huge win.
You also came out with the flag scarf.
Right. When I launched the flag line, actually, not everyone liked it. There were people who was really upset that being American was associated with the headscarf. But there were a lot of people who liked it. And actually, when we designed it, my husband helped me with the ideation. I had Ibtihaj Muhammad in mind because she's amazing, right? She's an amazing athlete.
Just to remind everyone, she participated in the Olympics in the fencing competition.
Right, exactly. And I believe she got a bronze medal for that. I actually met her before at Fashion Fighting Famine, which is a fashion show that's held in Irvine. And I told her that, maybe one day you'll be in the Olympics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She wore the scarf once when she was getting one of her medals.
So, Nancy, what has been your biggest accomplishment so far? You've done a lot of things.
I think my biggest accomplishment was choosing my husband to be my husband, right? I got married relatively young when I was 24. It was semi-arranged marriage, meaning, my parents and his cousin and his friend, everyone wanted us to meet. We delayed it by a year because no one wanted to be set up, but then we eventually met each other and then it worked out. But there was something about him where he really did want me to do what I wanted to do. And I feel like it's so important to have a supportive husband, a supportive partner, somebody who will champion you and not bring you down because of whatever society expects you to be as a woman. And the reality is, as a woman, as a South Asian woman, as a Muslim woman, just being female, there's so many extra things we have to do biologically for our house, for our home. And it's really hard to pursue, a career and also being a leader in your career.
What would you say is your biggest challenge or has been your biggest challenge?
I think my biggest challenge is just time, right? I feel like there's so much I want to do, so much I want to do with my kids, so much I want to do with my career, with my family, and time is always something that's very little that's available, and being able to manage it all.
How do you define success?
For me, the definition of success changed over the years. For me, success means to when I just feel happy and I feel like I contributed and I got something going.
Thank you so much, Nancy. This has been a wonderful conversation. I wish you luck.
Oh, thank you.
And I know that you'll probably be doing more amazing things, and I'll be watching out for you.
No, thank you so much for having me on this on your show, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing and sharing all these stories.
Thank you. I hope that you got some revealing confessions to help you in your journey to success. To nominate a guest on this podcast, send an email to info@confessionsofsuccessfulasianwomen.com.